Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about feeding an infant. And so we'll start talking about the choice that you need to make between breastfeeding and bottle feeding. And then we'll work our way into weaning them into more solid foods like baby cereal and baby food. Newborns, when they're born, they're very tiny, and so their stomach is tiny also. And their stomach only holds about 4 tablespoons of milk, which is about 2 ounces, and we'll get back to that here in just a second. At first, most babies' feeding schedules are pretty irregular. It's not as predictable of when they're going to want to eat. A lot of times it takes several months for them to really be on a good schedule of they're going to eat every so many hours. Now, I have heard of some people who say their baby comes home from the hospital and they're on a schedule and they only eat every 3 hours and they're a very good baby. Well, they're lucky. My kids definitely were not like that. By about 7 months, as they grow, they're going to eat more at one time and they're going to need less feedings during the day. They're also going to start to eat other foods, like I said, to the point of eating baby foods and cereals. The feeding sessions are going to get fewer during the day. So about 7 months, they need about 3 or 4 feedings a day. All right, so back to the size of their stomach. Again, they're very small. So the first day that they're born, their stomach's about the size of a cherry, and it only holds about a tablespoon to just about a tablespoon and a half. If you look at that bottle, there's really not much milk there, and that's about all their stomach will hold at a time. So they're eating more frequently to be able to get the nutrients they need. By about day 3, their stomach's gotten a little bigger, about the size of a walnut, and they eat about 3/4 of an ounce to an ounce of milk. At 1 week, their stomach is the size of an apricot, and they're eating about 1.5 ounces, maybe 2 ounces of milk or formula. And then at 1 month, their stomach is expanded to the size of an egg, and they're eating somewhere between 2.5 and 5 ounces per feeding. All right, so let's talk about breastfeeding first. And there are tons of benefits of breastfeeding. And so we're going to kind of pick some of the highlights. Basically, your breast milk is the mother's body makes that specifically for what the baby needs. It's nutritionally a well-balanced, perfect food for what the baby needs. The mother's body is also going to pass antibodies from their body to the baby, so it helps build up their immune system. It helps them get sick less. It also, if the mom gets sick, a lot of times they'll say that the antibodies the mom's body's using to fight off that illness will actually be passed to the baby, and so then the baby either will maybe not get sick at all, or will have a lighter case of whatever that illness might be. Convenience-wise, it is fairly convenient. I think you could probably make an argument either way, but at 3 o'clock in the morning when the baby's hungry, you don't have to go down and make a bottle, warm it up, all of those things. It is money saving. You don't have to buy formula, and we're going to be looking at the cost of what formula would cost for a year later on. It decreases the risk of SIDS. SIDS stands for sudden infant death syndrome, and basically that's when a baby dies in its sleep. So if the mother's breastfeeding, there's a less of a risk of that. And then they do see studies that babies who were breastfed later on in life have a higher IQ. For the mom, there's some physical benefits. It helps the uterus go back to a normal size after delivery. It also helps the mother lose her pregnancy weight. Part of that is you're giving some of the calories that you're taking in to the baby to help their body grow and function. And then it decreases the risk of breast cancer and ovarian cancer for the mother. There's definitely a lot of bonding that will happen between mother and baby. They spend a lot of time together. There's a lot of contact there. So mothers who breastfeed and babies tend to be very well bonded. If the mother's breastfeeding, they really need to make sure they're eating nutritiously, because what they take in is what they're passing to their baby. The baby needs all of the nutrients. The mother's body needs all the nutrients. So you have to eat a well-rounded meal. And then you need to drink plenty of fluids to help the body produce enough breast milk for the baby. All right, so bottle feeding, and basically I'm talking about formula. Yes, you could pump breast milk and give that to the baby, but we're talking more of the formula route. Formula is formulated to imitate breast milk as best as they can. And so when you pick your formula, a lot of times in the hospital, they will start you out with a certain type of formula. You'll use that, and if there's some changes that need to be made based on the baby's diet, you can do that later on. Formula should be prepared exactly according to the directions to make sure its consistency and its nutrients are what the baby needs. If you prepare a bunch of bottles ahead of time, they do need to be refrigerated. And then when you go to warm them up, you're going to put them in a pan of hot tap water. You do not want to microwave them. Microwaving isn't an even heating, and so you can have really hot spots in the bottle and really cold spots. So that would be something you really want to avoid. But you want to put it in a pan of hot tap water, a bowl, something like that, that you can put the hottest water that comes out of your tap. You could warm that up a little bit, but you really don't want to put it in boiling hot water. To make sure it's warm enough for the baby and not too hot, you're just going to put a few drops of the formula on your wrist, and then you'll check to see if it's how warm it feels. It should feel pleasantly warm on your wrist. If it feels too hot, it's too hot for the baby and it could burn their mouth. If it's too cold, you probably want to let it sit in the water a little bit longer. All right, a little bit more about formula. You should not let the baby suck on an empty bottle. A lot of times empty bottles, they're just taking in air, and that's going to fill up their stomach with air. That also will cause discomfort, and sometimes the more air that they have in their stomach, the more likely it is that when the air comes up, it brings up the milk they just ate with them. You also don't want them to fall asleep with it in their mouth, because then they may not completely swallow it. So it could cause tooth decay if that's starting to just sit on their gums, even if they haven't started teething yet. And then if it pools in the back of their throat, it can cause throat infections. So once they fall asleep, take that away. If they wake back up, maybe they want to finish it. But at that point, take the bottle away from them. All right, so as they're drinking, breastfed or bottle fed, they're going to start to usually swallow some air. A lot of times they say bottle fed babies are going to swallow more. There are bottles out there that can help reduce that, but maybe just do some research and find out what the best bottle might be to help them not get so much air in their stomach. If that's not released, that air that's built up in their stomach is going to cause discomfort. And so they can't bring that air up themselves. So you have to help them. And so with breastfed babies, about every 5 minutes, you want to try to burp the baby. And then with bottle-fed babies, you can see how much they've eaten. So about every couple of ounces, you want to try to burp them. So to burp the baby, I guess traditionally you think of holding the baby against your shoulder, supporting the baby's head, and then gently rubbing or patting the baby's back. You can also lay them face down on your lap. Again, you're supporting their head and just gently rubbing or patting their back. Sometimes that pressure on their stomach can help bring up the air. Another possibility would be just having them in a sitting position on your lap, and you're supporting their head, you're rubbing their back gently or patting their back gently. Sometimes with that, if you just kind of bounce them just a little bit with your knees, that can help bring up the air as well. Sometimes it's just trial and error, finding out what works for the baby, or trying different things to help bring up that air that's trapped in their tummy. Sometimes though, when the air comes up, it brings with it some of the milk or formula that they just ate. So you do want to have a clean towel or something that will catch that extra formula if it comes up when they burp. Otherwise, it probably goes all over you or all over them. Again, you're gently patting or rubbing their back until they burp and that air is expelled. Okay, so eventually they have to be weaned away from the bottle. Typically, they're going to start showing less interest in breastfeeding or bottle feeding somewhere between 9 and 12 months. Usually that's because they're starting to eat baby food or at the end of that eating some finger foods. So they have other things that they're getting their nutrients from. It is recommended bottle-wise that you give up the bottle by about 12 months because the rubber of the bottle nipple can affect their teeth. And so the same thing with pacifiers. They usually say at a year they should give that up. It's a gradual change. You can't just say, oh, your happy birthday, we're taking away your bottle. It tends to be something that you just start eliminating feedings, and instead of giving them the bottle, you give them a sippy cup. And they do have some transition sippy cups that help make that transition for the baby. A lot of times meal time is the easy time that you can give them a cup and they can drink out of the cup instead. Sometimes the harder ones to give up is usually like nap time or bedtime. So just slowly offering them the milk and juice from a cup tends to help with that weaning process. And typically with weaning them away from the bottle, like I said, about a year. Breast milk, you can keep breastfeeding for longer. That's not going to affect their teeth like the rubber bottle or pacifier will. All right, so solid foods, usually somewhere between 4 to 6 months. Sometimes they recommend a little bit later that you start introducing baby food. Typically, you start with a real watered down cereal, like an oatmeal cereal. That's almost all milk and a little bit of texture to it, because it's a weird transition for them to go from drinking just liquids to having some texture there. So it's a very gradual process. Once they master the cereal, you can start making it a little bit thicker so they can start to get that texture. Typically, they say one new food every 3 to 5 days or so that you can watch for allergic reactions. If you give them a whole bunch of new foods all at once and they're allergic to something, now you don't know what they're allergic to. So watch for those reactions. See if there's anything that would be a cause for concern. Okay, so typically you start with cereals. Like I said, that oatmeal cereal that's real watered down, and you start to make it a little thicker. Once you can do rice cereal, oatmeal cereal. Once they have gone through those, then you can go to the jarred baby food, the vegetables first. Typically, they say start with vegetables and then go to fruit because fruit is sweeter. So if you start with fruit and then go to vegetables, you've got that stronger taste, and they may not want to eat their vegetables. So typically the green vegetables, peas, green beans first, and then you go to the sweeter vegetables like carrots or sweet potatoes. And then you can try different fruits. But again, leaving several days in between so that you can check to see if there is any reactions. And then finally, they do make pureed meat in the baby food jars. You can use that if you want. Sometimes there's different stages to help build up and get a little more texture and a little thicker for the babies. In the stage 2, they typically have things that are combined, like chicken and broccoli or ham and apples or something like that. It takes a lot of patience. It's typically messy. It's typically something that's going to take a while. Once they're old enough to sit up, then you can offer them foods from the table. So things that they could easily pick up and put in their mouth. Things like cooked carrots or cooked peas or corn. It's going to, again, take a while to get them to feed themselves. A lot of times as that hand-eye coordination develops, it helps a little bit more. But sometimes it takes a while to get enough food in their mouth because they drop it. A lot of times if you have a pet, the pet likes the child at this point because they're sitting underneath their high chair catching all the things they've dropped. Self-feeding, usually about 9 months is when that starts. Like I said, it's messy. There's usually food everywhere, and there's always those pictures that people have. I think everybody has something where there's foods all over their face and maybe in their hair and all over their clothes or all over the room. There's a commercial where the baby's got spaghetti and then at the end it's all over everybody and all over the table and all over the room. Maybe not to that degree all the time, but it can be messy. It can be time consuming. Again, it takes a while for them to get enough in their mouth to fill their stomach. And finger foods are best to start. Again, it takes a lot of coordination to when they start using spoons to keep the food on the spoon and make it to their mouth and get enough to their mouth. So that's another issue of trying to get them to feed themselves. By a year, a lot of times they can eat most of the same foods as the rest of the family. You might be cutting things up for them, making it bite size, but they do a pretty good job. And a lot of times when that pincher reflex starts to come in, they can start picking things up off of their plate or off their high chair and eating that themselves.